Well, good evening and welcome to our public meeting about the Ogier Ponds project. This is a component of the Anderson Dam Seismic Retrofit project that aims to improve the passage for Steelhead and Coyote Creek. My name is Lisa Bancroft. I'm the Assistant Officer of Valley Water overseeing the project, and I'll serve as your meeting MC. So we'd like to welcome all of you that are joining us over Zoom. And I want to let you know that the meeting is being recorded so that anyone who misses tonight's meeting or wants to review it later can do so on Valley Water's YouTube channel. Also, a few housekeeping items here at the Morgan Hill Community Center. The bathrooms are located outside the doors and down the hall to your left. And we also have refreshments at the back of the room. Help yourself at any time to cookies and coffee. Also, please check out our valuable water conservation information and giveaways. Even after a wet winter and spring, we're asking everyone to make water conservation. Following the meeting, we asked that you please fill out a brief survey that was included with your materials that came in. These are really valuable to us so that we can provide and give us the most meaningful feedback and what was helpful and useful. So unfortunately, the chair of our board of directors, Sean Varela, is not able to join us this evening. But I'd like to acknowledge Director Keegan on Zoom. Or if there's any other directors on Zoom, welcome. I would also like to welcome Justin Tran of Senator Laird's office, who is joining us this evening. And this project would not be possible without coordination and input from Santa Clara County Parks and Recreation Department. We're working closely with the county due to the site, of course, being on county-owned land, and we're grateful for that partnership. So I'd like to acknowledge Annie Thompson, Deputy Director, and Myra Cervantes, Interagency Program Project Manager, and thank you for joining us. So these ponds are located south of San Jose along Highway 101. They were created by the former gravel quarry that operated there from the 50s through the 90s. And they are an extremely popular recreational destination today. In fact, you'll often see people fishing or watching birds, and this site actually has the highest bird diversity of any inland site in the county. Near the ponds is the Santa Clara County Model Aircraft Sky Park, where many folks enjoy flying their model airplanes. And the Coyote Creek Trail, of course, also runs along Coyote Creek and the Ogier Ponds, which is an important hiking and cycling route. Now, Coyote Creek is also a critical habitat for federally protected steelhead. During high flows in 1997, the creek jumped into the ponds and has flowed through them ever since. In 2003, Ogier Ponds was identified as a high priority fish passage area by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the National Marine Fisheries Service in the Fisheries Aquatic Habitat Collaborative effort. At this time, Valley Water is proposing to address the fish passage problem at Ogier Ponds. This would be done as a conservation measure with Anderson Dam Seismic Retrofit project and will be included in this summer's draft environmental impact report for the project. So our focus at this meeting is to hear from you. Our team is seeking input from the public on this important fish passage project. There are 6 alternatives for the site, and they each have pros and cons when it comes to impacts on habitat, recreation, and construction. Tonight, we'd like to hear which factors are the most important to you. We welcome any and all comments and questions from you because we want to make this a better project for everyone. Thanks again, and I'll turn the microphone over to Kevin, who is our senior engineer and project manager.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's see if I can get this technically working here. Lisa already covered quite a bit of my presentation, so I'm going to have to catch up, but hold on with me 1 second. I'm entering my password to get into my computer. Okay, so my name is Kevin Sibley, senior engineer, not a public speaker. I'm more of a subject matter expert. My background in civil engineering and river engineering in particular. I've done some steelhead projects in the last 6 years in Valley Water. The project goal is really to improve steelhead conditions in Coyote Creek, which are difficult. As Lisa mentioned, Valley Water, county parks, and several resource agencies all agree that removing Coyote Creek from the ponds will benefit steelhead. And that's kind of the main driving message tonight. How do we do that? We have a bunch of alternatives to show. There's a little bit of background in the presentation that shows how the mining created ponds. There's some beautiful pictures that show the value of the ponds. There's a number of alternatives which show different ways that we could remove the creek from the ponds. And finally, there's sort of a feasibility matrix at the end, which allows you to compare the different alternatives. So with that, I'll just get started here. We're going to present the need for the project, the conceptual solutions, and hopefully we'll get feedback about these alternatives and feedback about any other concerns you might have. So here's a satellite view for orientation. You can see San Francisco and Santa Cruz on the coast, San Jose and Morgan Hill in Santa Clara Valley. This is a 321 square mile watershed for Coyote Creek. It's rural, agricultural, and also urban. There's two dams, Coyote Dam and Anderson Dam, located in about the middle of the watersheds. The Coyote Dam was built in 1936 and contains about 23,000 acre feet of water. The Anderson Dam was constructed in 1950 and contains about 90,000 acre feet of water. The blue line here represents Coyote Creek. It travels about 30 miles from Anderson Dam down to the bay. And X marks the spot of the Ogier Ponds. So here's another aerial view of the project. The light blue line is Coyote Creek as it flows from Anderson Dam, upper right-hand corner. The creek flows down under Highway 101, past some orchards, and then through the Ogier Ponds. And then it continues another 25 miles downstream to the bay. The purple dashed line is the county's Coyote Creek Trail, which is a major concern for the project because there's so many members of the public that use it daily. That trail flows basically along the creek and around the ponds. So the challenge for the project is how do we get the creek out of the ponds? The dark blue line represents where the creek was in 1997. And then there was large hydrologic event caused Anderson Dam to spill, and large flows jumped the creek into the ponds where they've remained since 1997. So we're going to look at some project photos and history. We'll define the problem. We'll go over some of our planning objectives. We'll talk briefly about the planning process, and then we'll jump into the conceptual alternatives. There's 6 of them, and then question and answer. So here's an even closer view of the Ogier Ponds project area. Coyote Creek's light blue and the trails in purple. You can see the creek comes in and flows from right to left. It goes into pond 1, pond 2, pond 3, pond 4, and then it exits to the natural channel downstream from the ponds. There's 2 more ponds here, 5 and 6, and these are engaged when high flows come through the creek. And then there's also the mitigation ponds, and these occur. They get wetted when really high events, for example, when Anderson Dam spills. This triangular red shape is a ground photo location. So we're going to zoom into that location and take a look on 3. This is a photo looking south. You can see pond 3 in the background, and you can see the trail through the center of the photo with 4 cyclists cruising by. Here's a blow up. Those same cyclists went off to a county parks eucalyptus rest area, which is located in those trees. And if you're out there, you see bicyclists every 10 minutes going by. You'll see the symbol jump over a little bit to the right, and we're going to look at Pond 3 from another view. This view is looking west towards the Santa Cruz Mountains. Pond 3 is in the middle of the photo, and you can see a nice, beautiful open field. And just on the other side of the split rail fence is the Coyote Creek Trail where the cyclists go by. And then the gray gravel in the bottom left is the gravel road that heads over to the Santa Clara County Model Aircraft Sky Park. We'll go there next. Button. You know how to get us back on. But never mind, figure it out. Okay, so we're jumping over to the Model Aircraft Sky Park. So this is a really beautiful facility that's located on the county parks land. The club began flight operations in 1986 and includes over 300 members. The Sky Park includes a paved runway and taxi lanes for planes. There's restrooms, covered picnic area. And this is also a highly used facility. We're going to jump over and look at Pond 2 next. This is what the ponds look like when you're up close. This is about 29 acres of open water and 5 acres of dense forest that surrounds the pond. And there's just a vast abundance of birds, reptiles, and fish at this location. So it's just a beautiful spot. And Coyote Creek is actually flowing through this pond. We'll jump over to the project downstream limit next. This is a steel truss bridge that extends over Coyote Creek. This is the section of the Coyote Creek Trail that's also part of the Bay Area Ridge Trail system, which includes about 400 miles around the Bay Area. You can see the steel truss bridge. Now we're going to look at sort of the history in terms of air photos. We started in 1939. We'll jump ahead 29 years to 1968. Another 25 years to 1993, and then 30 years ahead to present day. And this is really interesting because you can see the land development. At this point, Ogier Ponds would be in the center of the photo at the end of Ogier Avenue. In 1939, the area was mostly orchards. The shaded blue area would be the creek's active floodplain, and the blue line would be the creek's low flow path. And you can note that the orchards pretty much stop where the floodplain begins due to the scour that occurs there. Further, Coyote Dam was constructed 3 years earlier in 1936. So it's possible that the floodplain was a little bit wider before the dam went in to reduce flood flows. Further floodplain reduction would have occurred when Anderson Dam was constructed 11 years later in 1950. You can also note that this photo was taken before the South Valley Freeway or Highway 101 was constructed. And there's no evidence of gravel mining at this time. But if you keep your eyes on the center of the photo, you can see the ponds started showing in 1968. 29 years later, you see gravel mining at the end of Ogier Avenue. About 3 million cubic yards of material were taken out of this location. The bright white areas are dugout pits filled with groundwater, which is relatively high at this location. The pits later become Ogier Ponds, and you can see ponds 2, 3, 5, and 6 evidently. No Highway 101 yet. Okay, golf course at this time. And you can also note that the blue line isn't really moved. And I think I can show you the blue line not moving. Click back and click forward. So the flood flows at this point would have been after both the dams were installed. And so we do have attenuation of regular flood events, which is probably why the gravel mining got started. it's easier to work in the channel. There's less big water coming through. So another 27 years later, we're in 1993. You can see Highway 101, model aircraft sky park. The gravel mining is ended by now, and the ponds are similar to what we have today. However, note that Coyote Creek is now squeezed between the cherry orchard and Pond 1 at the end of Barnhart Avenue. And I'll just back up to show that change. So at the close of mining, a small earthen bypass channel was constructed to keep Coyote Creek out of Pond 1. However, the undersized bypass channel was breached in '97 during a high flow event. And since then, the creeks flow through the ponds. Jumping up to present day, you can clearly identify the golf course 101 aircraft sky park. And now you can see Coyote Creek flowing through the ponds, and there's some new buildings and some of the orchards that remain just south of Barnhart Avenue. So just a quick visit back at Pond 2. And the problem is not obvious if you're just looking at the beautiful pond. However, if you were a steelhead, you would see things differently. So a little background about steelhead and their life cycle. They are a federally threatened species and are protected under the Endangered Species Act of 1973. In Coyote Creek, adult steelhead spawn and produce eggs in suitable spawning areas, which are mostly upstream from Ogier Ponds. After hatching and about 1 to 3 years of growing, juvenile steelhead migrate downstream to San Francisco Bay, then eventually to the Pacific Ocean, where they grow and mature into adults. When the time is right, the adults swim back to the same place where they were born, upstream from Ogier Ponds, where they spawn and start the process over again. Steelhead can spawn more than once, so they often migrate back to the ocean after spawning. So how are the ponds a problem? This photo is what you would expect to find at the edges of the ponds where the water's not very deep. The ponds get up to 35 feet deep, and you wouldn't see plant life in much deeper than 4 feet of water. The problem with the picture is adult steelhead have to swim through the ponds, and they're adapted for creeks. So they actually smell the movement of water, and they look for velocity to help them navigate of fresh water. So the adult steelhead that are moving upstream, they often get lost, or delayed trying to navigate through Pond 4, Pond 3, Pond 2, and Pond 1 to get to the upstream spawning area. The same thing happens for the small juvenile fish that are headed out to sea, except they get eaten by largemouth bass like this, a non-native predatory fish. So those two things are big problems for steelhead: getting lost and getting eaten. This is just a basic view of ponds with their depth and color code. The dark red is about 30 to 33 feet deep. The green is much shallower. It's back to the land's elevation. But you can see that Pond 1 is probably 25 to 27 feet deep. Pond 2 is close to, it's 33 feet deep at the deepest point. And then as the creek migrates to Pond 3, it's again 25 feet deep. Pond 4 is also about close to 30 feet deep. The purple line is again where Coyote Creek was flowing after the mining was completed, before it jumped into the pond and started to run through the blue line. So problem one is that the ponds disrupt steelhead passage, and they also harbor non-native predators. Problem two is that the ponds trap sediments that are needed for downstream steelhead habitat. Gravels that come bouncing down the creek basically fill into Pond 1 and don't move downstream to provide habitat. The third problem is the ponds tend to heat up water So cold water that comes in pond 1, by the time it gets to pond 4, it's 6 or 8 degrees warmer, which can stunt the growth of juvenile steelhead. So now that we've covered the project background and the problems facing steelhead, let's discuss our plan to find a solution. So the project objectives are really to separate the creek from the ponds. We want to construct suitable spawning and rearing habitat for steelhead. We want to maintain healthy water quality in the ponds after the creek is moved. We want to cooperate with the Anderson Dam Seismic retrofit project. And we also want to minimize any impacts to recreational features, like the Coyote Bike Trail. So this is the general catch-all planning process slide. And we start out by identifying and defining the problem, the field investigations and computer analysis. Next, we develop a wide-ranging set of conceptual alternatives, which is where the project is at today. Our next steps will be to eliminate the alternatives that fail to meet feasibility criteria. And the most feasible alternative will be further developed into the staff recommended alternative, which will be included in a planning study report to be reviewed for and approved by Valley Water and County. So it should be noted here also that the planning process includes public outreach and stakeholder input tonight. And we have a website that basically provides updates about the project as it moves forward. So all of the planning process goes into our planning study report to complete the planning phase. And just a little bit more about alternative screening, which is where we're coming up next. The project team is currently developing conceptual alternatives, which will be described later in this presentation. The next step in the planning process will be to evaluate and screen alternatives for feasibility. And here are some of the preliminary feasibility criteria that we use. We consider if the project meets the objectives. We consider the ranging costs, technical and practical feasibility, property availability, and that all generally describes whether or not the project is feasible. So here's another ground photo of the old alignment when the mining was completed, the pre-97 alignment. And you can see the creek flow through here, and you can see good vegetation. There's some garbage, right? But for the most part, it's an area that could be developed for steelhead. This next slide is a little video clip. This is upstream from the aircraft Sky Park by a couple hundred feet. And the project team is considering this for steelhead as a reference reach for steelhead passage, spawning, and rearing. Here's a little video clip. And you can see that the water's moving pretty quickly. It has plenty of oxygen. There's low flood plains, there's large wood debris, and there's even a little backwater channel on the right. And we're looking at this to come up with design features for our conceptual alternatives. So this slide is basically an overview slide designed to basically show the physical proximity of all 6 alternatives. And I'll go into a little bit more detail, but this just is kind of a funny graphic that shows that we're trying to consider every opportunity here. The first alternative is to catch and release. Both adults and juvenile steelhead would be captured by qualified fisheries biologists and then trucked either upstream or downstream, depending on which way they're going, to completely avoid the ponds. The alternative would have little or no impacts to county parks infrastructure, like the Coyote Creek Trail. However, this approach would not improve steelhead habitat because trapping and sediment in pond 1 would continue, as would warming of the creek. So alternative 2 includes creating a new channel on the Highway 101 side of the ponds. The red shade is the approximate footprint of the new channel. The dark blue dashed line is where the new creek would flow. This alternative would impact the Coyote Creek Trail at multiple locations and would also disrupt access to the model aircraft parkway. It also involves cutting into the hillside, which would require digging out a huge volume of earth. The brown symbol there is an engineering reference to a cross section. So the next slide is a graphic that shows the detail as if you were looking into the channel from underground, so to speak. The red line indicates where the new channel would be dug out of the ground. And it's also important to note that there's a vertical exaggeration on this slide in that the squares, which are equidistant, are actually 100 feet across and 20 feet tall. And that's been manipulated to bring out some of the detail in the channel. So if you look at it, it's 400 feet across horizontally and about 60 feet deep. So this is a massive excavation effort to bypass the channel on the Highway 101 side of Ogier Ponds. Here's what the completed channel would look like. It would be designed for steelhead and would include riparian trees and creekside vegetation. And for each of the alternatives, the 5 alternatives, 2 through 6, there would be an option to include trails and maintenance roads at the edge of the channel. But what you can see is we're trying to give the creek ample room to move back and forth within a 400-foot wide floodplain. And we've planned it out with appropriate riparian trees to get rearing and spawning areas. Here's a view of alternative 3, which partially removes some of Ogier Ponds. Again, the red shape shows the alternative footprint, the dark blue dash lines with creeks low flow channels would flow. In this case, there might be more than one low flow channel because we have so much room to work with. Note that this alternative would have less impacts to the Coyote Creek Trail than alternative 2, but would require a very large amount of earth to be imported to fill the ponds. This is on the order of almost 2 million cubic yards of material be needed to fill the ponds. Here's a cross-section view. It's another underground or underwater view of the proposed alternative. Note that the area beneath the red line would be filled with imported earth. However, some of the pond would remain. This would be about 850 feet across. So it's a very wide swath. Alternative 4 completely removes all of the Ogier Ponds and would restore the landscape to pre-gravel mining conditions. Impacts to the trail would be similar as for alternative 3. And the amount of imported material would be slightly greater to completely fill the ponds. This is about 1,200 feet across. Moving on to alternative 5. This is a sort of hybrid approach that realizes that the 1997 channel, which was constructed after mining, was too small. So this makes it much larger. We have 2 cross sections shown, one at Ogier Avenue and one at Pond 1. And the difference being that at Ogier Avenue, we'd be cutting into existing ground to create a floodplain and reusing that material to fill up Pond 1. However, amount of material needed would require importing material. But there would also be a separation berm that would keep the new channel out of Pond 2. And that's also another large volume of imported material. So first we'll take a look at the Ogier Avenue cross section. We would dig in about 8 feet into the ground. And you can see the old pre-1997 Coyote Creek channel on the right side there. That would be partially filled. And we would create a 400-foot wide, 8-foot deep new channel with appropriate vegetation and spawning gravels and a riparian corridor for steel bed. This next slide is at Pond 1 upstream section. So here we'd fill up to the red line, create something similar to this. Actually, there would be water in the channels, and we could have a hiking trail or a maintenance road shown. But this is a wide channel. This is 680 feet across for Pond 1, and you can't necessarily partially fill it because it's so deep. So this would be a win for floodplains. Alternative 6 is similar to alternative 2 in that it completely avoids the ponds. It's identical to the last alternative in the lower half, Ogier Avenue down, but in the upper half, instead of filling the pond, it goes into the orchard. And this alternative would be have very little impacts to the county trail or the model plan work. Just to review, the Ogier cross section is the same as you saw for alternative 5. And the Pond 1 cross section, or pond, upstream Pond 1 section would actually cut into the orchard that's 300 foot wide. And that's about 8 feet deep, new channel. So back to the busy slide. To try and summarize, alternatives 2 and 6 bypass Ogier Ponds completely. Alternative 2, red shaped graphic, would bypass to the east through a hill and would include multiple impacts to the Coyote Creek Trail. Alternative 6, the blue shape, would pass to the west through private lands in the pre-1997 flow path. And include little or no impacts to the trail or the sky park. Alternative 3, the orange shape would import earth to partially remove the ponds and create a wide landscape. There would be some impacts to the trail where you can see there's an intersection where the trail cuts across the creek. We would have to manipulate that in some way to adjust for the new wide flow plan. Alternative 4, which is the purple shape, would completely remove the ponds and create an even wider landscape, more fill imported. And it would have similar impacts to the trail as alternative 3. Finally, alternative 5, the green shape would import earth to completely remove Pond 1 and would reoccupy the pre-1997 flow path with little or no impacts to the trail. So the next slide provides a preview of the next step of the project, the planning process, which is to evaluate each alternative for feasibility. So this slide shows preliminary evaluation of the conceptual alternatives. The 6 columns include fish passage, aquatic habitat, impacts to recreation, earthwork volume, land acquisition, and cost estimates. And these are examples of criteria that would be used to rank and compare the alternatives. As a quick overview of this information, all 6 alternatives will satisfy fish passage criteria. You can see the green checks to the first column. All but the fish transport alternative 1, would enhance aquatic habitat. Impacts to recreational facilities vary significantly. No impacts for conceptual alternative 1, 5, and 6. However, 2, 3, and 4 would definitely require the trail to be modified, and would also disturb access to the mall aircraft park. The earthwork impacts also vary significantly. And we're symbolizing that with little dump trucks there. And each one would represent about 100,000 cubic yards of imported material. So you can imagine with the trucks, you get the dust and the vibration and the noise. So that's the definite criteria for feasibility. As is land acquisition. The first 4 alternatives would be on county lands and would require no land acquisition, while alternatives 5 and 6 would have impacts to private properties. Finally, preliminary estimates, cost estimates indicate a wide range in cost, which is mostly affected by the earthwork volumes. So the cost, the dollar symbols are proportional to the truck symbols. So I have one more slide for the project schedule here. We can get a question and answer. The planning phase will be completed in 2024. The design phase will start in 2024 after planning is completed, and design in 2026. After the design phase is completed, the project will prepare for construction for about 5 years, while the Anderson Dam seismic retrofit project is bypassing flows with its construction of the dam. Ogier Ponds will start construction in about 2032 when Anderson is completed. Valley Water will provide project updates on our website throughout the project schedule. And if there's interest, there'll be another public meeting to present the feasible alternatives in greater detail and to receive public input and stakeholder input. This meeting would probably take place in this coming fall. This concludes the conceptual alternatives presentation. And so with that, I think we should move on to questions and answers. But first, we want to acknowledge National Marine Fisheries Service for their support of the project and attendance tonight. We have supervisory fisheries biologist Gary Stern and fish biologist Paige Vick here tonight. And I'd like to ask them to say a few words.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Did a great job explaining. Explaining a complicated project. So my name is Gary Stern. I'm with the National Marine Fisheries Service, West Coast Region. I work out of our Santa Rosa office. And I've had the opportunity to walk quite a bit of Coyote Creek. And the industry gravel mining has taken a severe toll on the channel and habitat for native fish. What was, as Kevin showed, a shallow braided river channel have now become, some areas are now expansive ponds. As we heard in the presentation, these ponds are creating challenges for fish passage, for fish moving through the ponds. They are warming stream temperatures. They are trapping and capturing desirable gravel that's moving downstream, coarse gravel. And they support populations of non-native warm water fishes. So the Ogier Ponds complex is the largest set of remnant gravel pits on Coyote Creek. And the site is really problematic for salmon and steelhead. So we expect the Ogier Ponds restoration project is going to provide multiple and significant benefits to native fish and native wildlife, including the federally threatened Central California coast steelhead. By restoring a riverine channel, riverine conditions with an adjacent floodplain, that will have the effect of restoring in-stream habitat for steelhead and salmon. The adults will be able to navigate freely through this reach, and they won't be forced to navigate a gauntlet of ponds and culverts to get upstream and to move downstream. Similarly, the juveniles, smolts, which are moving downstream to the ocean, they, with a new riverine channel, They will not have to swim through the ponds and be subject to predation by the largemouth bass that Kevin was listening to us. And equally important is this is a mild channel that can be returned to suitable spawning conditions and juvenile breeding habitats. So there are, again, multiple benefits for native fish, and if we have Fish and Wildlife Service here, we probably hear more about benefits for other native wildlife too. So National Marine Fisheries Service strongly supports this project, and we'd like to thank Valley Water for playing a lead role, taking a lead role in pursuing this critical restoration project for Coyote Creek. Thank you.
I'd like to open it up to questions in the room, and we have also 20 or so attendees on Zoom. If you, while we're doing the in-room questions, would like to put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, but the Q&A, then we will get to those shortly as well. Any questions in the room? I see Mr. Muirhead. He comes to the most of our meetings, so he gets the first question.
Thank you. A couple of things. You mentioned recreational activities as the trail and the model airport. I believe County Parks also offers access to fishing in ponds. And there was something about water training of dogs. The other thing that you did mention, if you bypass, I personally like alternative 6, if you completely bypass the ponds, my understanding is water quality will suffer. Perhaps you should have mentioned that as well. My biggest concern is that County Parks is the landowner. You're leading this project. What actual signed agreements do you have with County Parks as of last October? I don't pay attention to this all the time, but the CIP committee of the district indicated that they were still trying to get a written agreement completed with County Parks for the planning effort. I would mention that the feasibility study was done back in 2018. And in December of that year, County Parks presented to the Board of Supervisors saying, we can continue to participate using only existing staff. We will not make any financial contribution to planning efforts. The efforts at that time, minimum, maximum rough estimates were 12 million to 52 million. That number's a lot bigger these days. And County Parks didn't have any money to do that. They also said that because the reclamation activities approved by the state completed, there was no obligation for any additional enforcement activities, because this, as you say, federally threatened species, and yet it appears that you're on the hook and they are not. So feel free to say a little bit on any of those.
It's clear this isn't the only meeting Mr. Muirhead goes to. Where do I start? Thank you for that information. It's true. Water quality is one of our objectives. So we are concerned about what will occur in the ponds after the creek's removed. And we're developing a really sophisticated water quality model in our consultant contract. And basically this is to predict algal growth and also dissolved oxygen and basically nutrient circulation in the ponds. The optimistic news is that there was included in the ponds, the mitigation ponds, which are not connected to the ponds currently. And we've been carefully monitoring those ponds, and we haven't seen anything that was detrimental. And there appears to be a strong connection between pond 1 and the mitigation ponds, which are just a few hundred feet away. So there's a communication between the creek and pond 1 and the mitigation ponds, which gives us some optimism about what the future water quality will be like. Also, the ponds, I think they're 129 acres, and that's a really large fetch surface. So you get prevalent winds blowing from north to south through the summer, which actually turns over the ponds quite a bit. So we're seeing good results from our water quality model. So I guess that's the long answer. We are concerned about water quality. That's one of our objectives. The other comment about all the recreational benefits, you're right, there's quite a few. There's fishing, there's the dog training folks are out there, there's just hikers everywhere. So I'm trying to make this a concise slideshow without taking too much detail. But thanks for pointing that out. And that's also a concern for our alternatives. The other question about the county's support for the project. When I came on this project in 2019, around the time the feasibility study was being completed, we were working on a memorandum agreement that would spell out county participation and district participation in the planning study. We have proceeded full speed with district participation, and county has also provided input in the feasibility study and also provided information to us as we move forward through planning. So they've granted us access to the project site where we're collecting data, including water quality data. And we're also working on a master license agreement, which basically spelled out the work that we intend to do on the county property. Funding question is above my head. Do you have a specific funding question that we can?
No, I'm just, I wanted a little more clarity on the roles of the two partners. Thank you.
Yeah, so basically we are working with the county and they are primary stakeholder being landowners. So as we move forward with all of our milestones, we're providing them to the county for it.
Thank you.
You may have guessed from that question, Mr. Muirhead is interested in governance structures of many agencies. And so I'm sure that's going to be a consistent question we have. Well,
thank you. I actually have a whole pile of questions, but my first one, how many steelhead are going up in this Coyote Creek? I mean, what's the magnitude of the fish population, and how do we think that this will increase it? I'm assuming that's what we're planning to do.
Yeah, so I've seen folks fishing out there. I don't know, do we have a fisheries biologist? Clayton can answer the question about the number of fish. But what we're trying to do is get the fish out of harm's way, out of the ponds, because the steelhead aren't adapted for big ponds and they just get lost or eaten. So that's our primary concern, is to remove them from the ponds. Clayton, if you want to talk about what we've seen for steelhead.
Yeah, my name is Clayton Neal. I'm a Senior Water Resource Specialist at Valley Water. To be honest, the number of steelhead in Coyote Creek are very low. We have monitoring that occurs for adult steelhead through a passive counting system that actually takes images fish swim upstream. And since we installed that counter in 2018, we haven't detected any adult steelhead moving upstream. That being said, we do have juveniles that are in the system. Our counter is not perfect, but the numbers that are present are low. One of these issues is Ogier Ponds. So removing this pond from being online to the creek is going to be really beneficial, and hopefully allow for an increase in the number of fish that could be present in the upstream.
You have one other follow-up on that?
Oh. Another quick question was, I was concerned about the water quality in the ponds, and have you considered diverting part of the water to sort of sweep out the ponds, and with the majority going through the main channel?
Yes, that's so we're taking the approach that the disconnected mitigation ponds look good, and there's a lot of groundwater movement through all the ponds. So there's a lot of circulation and turnover that occurs naturally. We're developing this really sophisticated water quality model so that if we see problems occurring, we can adapt and provide mitigative measures. And that might be circulatory machinery that stirs up the water, or some sort of fountain that aerates the water and adds oxygen. Or it could involve diverting some petty creek flow into the ponds if needed, but right now we're optimistic that those measures wouldn't be needed, because we're seeing good results from our water quality model, and we're seeing good results from our analog, which is mitigation funds.
Great, another question in the room here?
Are you saying that steelhead cannot navigate on water or lake water?
Well, I'm saying it's a problem for the steelhead that are trying to migrate upstream. The adults enter into the vast network of ponds that are connected with small breaches and old levees, and basically they're stalled in their migration to the upstream area where the water's cold and spawning occurs. So, yeah, they're not suited to ponds and large lakes.
Yeah, the history of the steelhead run is all like Coyote Creek into hot springs. You know, all those tributaries into the Anderson Lake and Coyote Lake. What you're saying is that there's no chance for steelhead to navigate lake waters.
Well, they can navigate in the ocean. I know that because that's where they grow into adults. So there's some capability, but the problem is the ponds are a detriment, in particular to the small juveniles that are headed out to sea, because they're bait for largemouth bass and other natives that prey. So that's the big problem, is getting the success of the juveniles out to sea.
What you're saying is that you're just opening up a very small stretch of Coyote Creek with steelhead, when the steelhead should be going, should be the fish ladder to dams, each of the dams, to let those fish completely go to their native water.
Yeah, I agree with you. The original configuration was they could get all the way up to the spring-fed headwaters upstream from the dams. That's right. But the reality is the dams are there now, and this project is really trying to account for the impacts of the construction that's occurring with the New Anderson project. So when the bypass system, the tunnel, is running water around the new construction of the dam, we're anticipating there's going to be a lot of fine silts and suspended sediments that move down the creek, and that could fill in over spawning areas and create harm for reproduction of steelhead. So this project is really trying to solve or provide the benefit that meets that detriment. So we're not trying to go back to before the dams. We're trying to go down to before the dam construction.
The dams have to be modified so the steelhead can pass those dams and go to their natural habitat all the way out of the creek.
Yeah, and we'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
There's another one in the room.
Hi, I'm Sam McLean, and I personally like alternative 6. One thing I see is you're improving a small portion, but does Coyote Creek go through Hellier Park?
Yeah, downstream.
Because I've seen how slow the water is and the shopping carts that are in that down there. And unless that is taken care of, you're only putting a Band-Aid on part of it.
I agree with you. There are many challenges for steelhead on Coyote Creek, and some of it has to do with subsidence that occurred, between like 1900 and 1970. San Jose sunk 14 feet. That affected water quality in Coyote Creek. There's a lot of issues, but we're trying to get to them. And one recent success was the bridge at Singleton. We replaced the culvert there, which was extremely problematic for steelhead, and now it's a freestanding bridge fish can swim through. So this is just one component fixing the problem.
Another question back here.
Yeah, it looks like options 5 and 6 are fairly feasible. And then those both return to the original channel. And it seems like that would be a good way to go. But both of them impact local landowners. Have those landowners been contacted? Are they, what is their stance on those? Because that's part of the feasibility. And so the landowners are intractable, that could be a problem. But those two options do look very feasible for that. And one other thing is, do you know if there's any consideration for the Anderson Dam retrofit project to address the steelhead migration? Any thought of maybe a fish ladder or some sort of a thing, anything like that to allow them to migrate past that dam? I understand, I guess, they're stuck in that 2-mile section between Anderson and Coyote, unless they also did something in Coyote. But is there any consideration being done at all?
I would have to get back to you on that question because I'm really focused on Ogier. I don't know the details of Anderson as well. To get to the ownership, private property, we have sent out appraisals just to come up with basic cost estimates. So we've had conversations. Our appraisers have spoken. Some of our executive staff have spoken to landowners. I've left voicemails and actually spoken. I've had meetings with some of the folks that live out there. So yeah, some of it is alarming. Alternative 6 would, require a large portion of the orchards and some of the buildings at the end of the
cherry orchard?
A majority of that acreage would be the cherry orchard, but about I think 6 acres is agricultural buildings at the end of Barnhart Road. And the low floodplain terrace where the RV parkway is. So that's a major risk to alternative 6. And so alternative 5 is almost completely on Parks property. There's a few corners of those properties that extend down into where 397 flow path was. And we don't see that being as very problematic for the property owners there. If we're just purchased those small portions of the property.
But yeah, it sounds like it makes it more attractive.
Yeah. Clayton, you want to add something?
Yeah, so in terms of fish passage associated with Anderson Dam, one thing we really should remember is that in order for fish to get to Anderson Dam, or to actually do anything to move them upstream from that facility, they need to get through Ogier Pond. So working from that downstream, started doing that through Singleton Road, making sure fish can pass through that area, making our way up to doing this work at Ogier. We have definitely taken into consideration taking fish up above the dam. It's not as easy as building a fish ladder. It's a very tall dam, and so it's not really feasible to build that. So in order to do something like that, we need to actually physically capture, handle the fish, drive them up around, and then release them up at those facilities. So these dams are here for water supply of the COVID. It's a very important infrastructure. So it's something that we need to keep in place, and moving fish upstream is not necessarily easy.
This ladder is not feasible because of the steepness of the dam.
Yeah, mainly the elevation of the dam. It's just too big of a climb to be able to facilitate something like that.
Are you saying the steelhead can't jump small waterfalls? The steelhead is amazing fish to travel in the.
I 100% agree with you. They are very amazing in terms of their jumping and their ability.
They can't climb that fish ladder from the dam.
Yes, it has to do with when you're building a fish ladder, the amount of space that it would take to get that from. So you would have to have a very long fish ladder in order to make those jumps to take it up that high. And that's not something that's typically done just because it's a long time for a fish to be in a confined, unnatural facility. Again, it's, I don't know exactly how tall it is, but they're big. What is it? 250 feet, yeah. So that's a big climb for these fish to make.
Yeah, each jump is typically a foot. 250 jumps in an artificial fish ladder is not ideal, really. They might be better to take the truck ride.
We got another question in the room, and then we've got, I think 7 or 8 on Zoom, and then we'll come back to the room.
I would just like to ask, has there been any collaboration with the local tribes here? With Valley Water? And also in mitigating this problem? And then also, how much toxic material are in the ponds?
Great question. That was my concern with alternative 5 and 6, which both involve on-site excavation of materials to create the floodplain. So we are putting together a geotechnical plan that's going to try to identify if there's any underground storage containers that might have been left by the miners. There could be diesel tanks out there. There could be hazardous materials that we don't want to encounter. So these are all things that would inform the feasibility study, and we're hoping to get that work started this summer. And then the tribal question, I think Sarah Kerboon could answer.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kerboon, Associate Water Resource Specialist, and I focus on Anderson Dam for the most part. And I can speak to, we've been focusing on the tribal coordination and outreach for all the dam facilities and moving that part forward, but that's next on our list. So it is part of the process, and we will actually be starting others.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I think we're going to go to some of our Zoom questions. These will be soft to you, and I think they're pretty technical. Jose?
Sure. So we have a total of 9 questions now. The first one is, what will be the impact of the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Sackett versus EPA on this proposed project, since it will separate what is now a wetland from navigable creek?
So this is another question from Sarah Freeman. We are concerned about local water impact. Sarah, please.
All right, so that's a very recently decided court decision. So I don't think we fully know how it will play out in California, but I suspect that it won't really drive how this project is shaped, because we have the California laws that also govern and protect wetlands. So I'm thinking that it won't actually do much for our project.
Next question. The creek is never going to stay in a separate channel. Historically, it changes course. We need to fill the ponds for this reason and to create a floodplain to help with flood control. Why has there been no mention of Chinook salmon, which also spawn in Coyote Creek today?
Great question. So the project objective, it really is for steelhead. That's kind of where this all started. I think if steelhead can make it, and probably Chinook salmon can make it. There's probably some question about how native they are. So I would say that if we're fixing the problem for steelhead, we're also fixing a problem for salmon. Sorry, what was that other question?
Why was there no mention of Chinook salmon, which also spawned in Coyote Creek today? Prior to that, it was just a comment.
Yeah, so the comment about why aren't we restoring to the historic condition? And we took a look at a historical ecology study that was prepared by San Francisco Estuary Institute, and a good portion of the area was actually not part of the riparian corridor. So a good portion of pond 2 and 3 and 4 were actually upland, more like trees and shrubs, and not necessarily a riparian corridor. So it wouldn't really be restoration to completely bring the landscape back to pre-gravel mining, unless you wanted to achieve fields that are high above the groundwater table and mostly grow grass, arid type vegetation. So our challenge is really to help steelhead, and so we're trying to figure out what's an adequate creek channel. Like the little video that we showed appears to be a good example of what a steelhead would be successful in. And we're also trying to create a floodplain, which is also part of the habitat feature for steelhead, for rearing, provides food. So the good question is, how much floodplain do you need? What are the dimensions of the channel? How big are the gravels? And these are all things that we're working with our stakeholders and our team to determine. But we're not quite there yet. We're still kind of looking at the mass project. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, to address the question regarding why is steelhead primarily mentioned, the main reason we specifically focus on steelhead is because they are federally threatened. So those are the fish that can be a real driver to these projects because of that level of protection. Chinook salmon are present in the watershed, and any benefits associated with this project for steelhead will also benefit the Chinook salmon.
Next question. People have been recolonizing Coyote Creek in the southern San Francisco Bay. When they reach Ogier Ponds, they will build dams which will reconnect the creek to the pond unless ponds are filled. No.
Is that beavers or goats? Beavers. Well, that's interesting. A lot of folks in the salmon and steelhead world are pretty happy about beavers. We have an expert biologist who can comment to this. Steve Rockford, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Rottenborn, wildlife ecologist with H.T. Harvey and Associates, a consultant to the Valley Water. So beavers have been increasing a little bit in the South Bay. They're still not in Coyote Creek anywhere near the Ogier Ponds. And where they do occur, it's pretty obvious, especially the Valley Water, who does so much monitoring and maintenance of the creek. So they know exactly where the beavers are just based on the beaver activity. If beaver ever made it up as far as the Ogier Ponds, it's something that could be dealt with if it would threaten the infrastructure there. But I wouldn't expect that beavers would be able to or be allowed to create enough modification to the channel and to the hydrology and to how the water's flowing to adversely affect the creek realignment and the infrastructure that's being proposed.
Steve, and part of the fish furniture that we would be building is wooden, so it's not necessarily that beavers would be harmful. It might not be a bad thing to have beavers. We haven't worked out those details yet.
Next question. How will the community learn about the indigenous peoples and native plant species of the territory? For example, community outreach, active education, inclusive historical narratives, traditional ecological knowledge sharing.
Very valuable comment. I agree. We should acknowledge the history and the culture. I can see Sarah's got some input for this. It's possible we would have signage that shows the historic information on site or value. Clearly, the whole Santa Clara County is indigenous, so this is just part of a bigger picture. Sarah, do you want to add this?
So we're not quite there yet. We haven't started the consultation, but that's usually a step that comes a little bit later once we have the formal outreach and we hear what's important to our local tribes. And they'll likely be partnering with Santa Clara County Parks, because I know they do a lot of that interpretive signage and just education. So I think that would be something we work out later.
You provide an overview of potential benefits and impacts to the alternatives to avifauna, both resident and wintering bird.
This is another good question for Steve. Please, Steve Rockford.
Sure, so that's a really good question and something that we've thought a lot about and that Valley Water's talked a lot about. This project will actually benefit avifauna overall because it's going to increase and improve habitat diversity. The Ogier Ponds, like Lisa Venkash said, is a super diverse area for birds, but what it lacks is that nice stream that's separated from the ponds with a broad riparian corridor. So that's the kind of habitat that's going to be created as part of the project, and especially with alternatives 5 and 6. There will still be so much open water habitat and freshwater marsh wetlands and various types of riparian vegetation that are still present and that won't be affected by the project. That the diversity of the avifauna will actually increase both breeding and wintering. So some of those birds that nest in sycamores, like the common mergansers and wood ducks and species that are already out there in the ponds, they're going to benefit from some of the riparian habitat along the creek that's going to be created, lots of kingfishers, things like that. But all the species that already use the Ogier Ponds complex, we don't expect them to disappear as a result of this project. So diversity is going to.
Thank you, Steve.
Next question, what will happen to the ponds over time if an alternative is implemented that bypasses the ponds?
So the short answer is we're not 100% sure, but we are developing tools that will help us predict what the water quality will be, and we're going to watch it carefully once the creek is removed from the ponds, and then we'll implement a strategy to mitigate impacts. So we're not going to let the ponds go foul, and we don't think they will, because already ponds that are on site close by look very healthy. So we're keeping an eye on it.
Next question, alternative 1 can start tomorrow. Why not start transporting fish as soon as possible and not wait years to decide what alternative to choose? When a reconfiguration is complete, transporting fish can stop.
We have our fisheries biologist who's going to help us with that question.
Yeah, thank you. So there are risks associated with moving these fish, capturing the fish and moving them upstream. Sometimes these risks might be worse than what could happen if fish are left to naturally navigate the ponds. Another side of that is it's very difficult to get permits to do work such as that, because this isn't necessarily a passage barrier. It's more of an impediment for these fish. They can make their way through the ponds or improve those passage conditions. So we still have that ability. So at this time, it's not really the most feasible, it's kind of a high risk strategy.
Next one's a comment. Local tribes of the South Bay are traditionally Cayman Nation, Indian Canyon, Mutsun Band, Ama Mutsun tribe, Mukregma, as modern parts of 101.
Noted. Thank you for that.
Next question. Project attenuation was calculated to be approximately 1,000 cubic feet. Has that changed?
Project, I'm sorry, what was, can you repeat the question?
Project attenuation was calculated to be approximately 1,000 cubic feet. Has that changed?
That has not changed as far as I know, because I'm not familiar with that statistic or that statement. I'm not quite sure what the project, I would need further detail to answer that question.
Next, for the individual who gave us this question, you can give us more detail, we'd be happy to answer it for you. Next question. Filling the ponds to create a broad floodplain could help absorb big winter storms. Isn't this a rare opportunity to establish a broad floodplain in this highly developed watershed?
So the question is, how much floodplain is appropriate for improving steelhead habitat? And we haven't quite worked that out at this point, but a lot of the alternatives that we saw included more than 100 feet on the other side of the creek, which we think is ample compared to the successful habitat upstream. So creating massive floodplains, in order for them to function, there's a cost of water. So we would demand more water from our water resources and our dam operations. And so that's a complicated challenge with water being so valuable. So our real interest is to figure out what's best, what's most appropriate for the steelhead, and to design a floodplain that's appropriately sized.
Thank you. And we received clarification on the previous question about attenuation. He's referring to a 2018 study for Ogier restoration project. Flood attenuation to be 1,000 cubic meters. Has that changed?
Well, it hasn't changed because we haven't done anything in Ogier Ponds yet. I will have to look into that. I'll look into that reference in the feasibility study, and if the person who left the question leaves contact information, I'll get back to you about that.
Sure, you can just if you provide us your email address, staff will follow up with you. And that's it for the Zoom questions.
We've got a few more in the room. We've got about time check about 15 minutes or so for our scheduled meeting. Any other questions in the room? I see one in the back.
I have two questions. The first one, mine is partially answered. My question is, before the channel got redirected because of flooding, how did water get into the percolation pond? I get the impression it's flowing underground with no direct channel. And so I guess that's what you're planning on in the future. That's how water get in. Second question. Why is it on several of the alternatives you need to fill in, do any fill? Why can't you just leave the pond there? Perhaps if you need to just make a separation with the new channel.
Okay, great question. Thank you. So the groundwater table last week when we measured it was maybe 12 feet below the land surface, and so the ponds are basically they're demonstrating the shallow groundwater table, and the little bit of water that comes in from Perry Creek, whether it's from the surface or whether it goes underground, is it's small in terms of the total volume of the ponds. So we think after the Perry Creek is removed from the ponds, we'll still see water there. It's not going away because the groundwater is so large. There's such a vast amount of it close to the surface. So does that help with your questions?
Yeah, the second one was about what are you filling in anything?
So we are just considering all the options right now, and we've received input from our stakeholders that we should look at all these different alternatives, some including massive infill to recreate landscape. So at this point in the planning study, we're not eliminating any conceptual alternatives. So if anybody in the audience has conceptual alternatives, we'll add them to our project.
But my proposal is number 7 to not fill it in. And, maybe make a berm or letting it separate it from the channel.
So that is alternative 5. Yeah, alternative 5 has minimal impacts to the ponds. It fills pond 1 because it's technically almost impossible to create a levee in the middle of that 25-foot deep groundwater fed pond. So it creates a very wide floodplain habitat area by filling pond 1, and then it creates a separation berm, which isolates the new channel from the remaining ponds 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, but we have some poster boards that show some of the typical pictures of alternative 5, so you can see those in the back of the room for those of you that are here. Any questions? Any other questions in the room? We have a follow-up online on Zoom.
This is the same study. Further clarification, the study that the gentleman is referring to is the Ogier Ponds feasibility study by Valley Water, March 2018.
Yeah, so that feasibility study is being incorporated into our planning study. That was really a study to just figure out if it was worth putting a lot of effort into. And that feasibility study from 2019 found that yes, it was worth investigating further. And so what we're doing now is we're taking that information and improving it with additional studies and analysis. So any information that was in that 2019 report has either been included or has been approved. I wasn't part of the feasibility study in 2019, but I've read it and I know that it's part of our project.
Thank you.
I think that's all of our questions. We'll invite Lisa Bankosh back to the microphone for a few closing remarks.
All right, so those are some really excellent questions. It really shows how interested you all are and educated you are. That's exactly why we have this meeting. So I want to thank you to all that attended. You can provide comments and reach out through the neighborhood liaison, Tony Montano, and his contact information and willing materials that you picked up. And so just on behalf of all project staff and our Valley Water Board Chair, John Marilla, we thank you and we wish you good.